found sitting at the right side of the center aisle. The bishop wondered why they had come, but he didn't have time to inquire before the Mass began. When it came time for the announcements, however, the bishop's curiosity got the better of him. He welcomed the two rabbis and asked why they had chosen to be present at this occasion where the young ladies were to become the brides of Christ. The elder of the rabbis slowly rose to his feet and explained, "Family of the groom." There are no shortage of surprises in the life of a bishop. As I mentioned at the outset, yesterday our diocese elected 3 new area bishops, Priscilla, Jenny, and Kevin. And we must always keep them in our prayers, for we know that leading the church has never and will never be an easy task. We struggle to adjust our thinking, to adapt structures to meet the needs of an ever-evolving society. The dominant mindset of our culture is that we have no need for God, let alone the church. Within the church itself, we wrestle over matters of sexuality and theology, and we deal with devastation of abuse in all its forms. The people of God have always struggled to know and to do the right thing. Ancient Israel had its share of tyrannical rulers, generations that were complacent to the needs of the marginalized. But time and time again, their God, Yahweh, intervened and reached into the brokenness of his people to bring healing and hope. And most often, God manifested his holy word through the prophets. People called by God to name the hard truths that society didn't want to face. The prophets would call out the sin, warn about consequences should the people remain in their morally reprehensible ways, and also offer a word of hope in God's promise of restoration should they change their ways. In today's reading from the book of Revelation, a portion taken from chapters 2 to 3, something along these lines is happening again. From John's perspective, humanity is on a path of self-destruction. Evil is rampant and threatens to destroy God's beloved creation. But the message of the gospel and the message of the book of Revelation is that evil cannot and will not be the last word. God will and has acted. I like how one writer put it, God has unsheathed the one weapon that would destroy evil, that had overcome evil, the cross. Throughout Revelation, we hear over and again that the definitive saving work of God was accomplished by the Lamb on the cross. This is a message that proclaims that God is not aloof or an uninvolved God. God was fully present in the Son. And the titles attributed to Jesus in Revelation, for example, like we heard last week, the Alpha and Omega, the one who was, who is, and who is to come, these are titles reserved exclusively for the divine. In chapters 2 to 3, then, we find God actively involved in the lives of the people, but not through the prophets as in the Old Testament, but in a new way. The Christ, who is the presence of God, walks among John's churches, these 7 churches of Asia. And it is Christ who plays the role that Yahweh had played through his prophets in old times. Christ has become a kind of new prophet. John calls him a faithful witness, who now speaks invaluable words to his people. And the messages to the 7 churches are also very important to the overall structure of the letter. They will set the stage for the visions and pronouncements to come in the future chapters. Each of the church's specific situations are addressed. But the church has always come to understand that these specific situations can be universally applied to Christians across space and time, and thus they might have particular relevance for us here today. So I want to take just a quick look at each of them, a little snapshot of each of these cities and churches and see if there might not be any chords that strike with us. The first of the 7 is Ephesus. It was the greatest city in the province of Asia and was known for housing one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Temple of Artemis, which was also an asylum and a place of refuge. Ephesus was the center of the imperial cult, and the Caesars were honored there. Even Domitian, who was emperor at the time of the book of Revelation, had built a temple there in order to be worshipped and honored him. There would have been a great external pressure for Christians to participate in the famed worship of Artemis and the emperors. But the Ephesians also faced internal threats in the form of those who were distorting the gospel, those John calls false teachers. And they are commended for refusing to go along with these messages, to resist these teachings. They fought hard to stay true to the faith. But perhaps they've become a little more focused on the intellectual and right doctrine aspect of the faith, that they are criticized for their lack of love. Perhaps their relationship with God had suffered through their trials. The second city mentioned is Smyrna, which was also a very prosperous city. It was second only to Pergamum as a center of emperor cult. But the Christians there were actually very poor. They didn't have much materially speaking. And what's more, they were in conflict with the strong Jewish presence in the city. And Judaism at that time had been granted status as an officially recognized religion within the empire. So they had certain rights and privileges being recognized in this way. And the Christianity, of course, started as a stream of Judaism, but by this time they were becoming more and more Gentile. More non-Jewish folks were coming to the faith. And so some Jews denounced them as being an unauthorized cult, and they would denounce them to the authorities. And the Gentile Christians, for their part, did not help their cause by proclaiming that they themselves were the true Israel and not the Jewish people. So there's conflict and turmoil. But the Christians there are promised that if they persevere, if they continue in their faith through their suffering, they will inherit what John calls the crown of life. Thirdly, Pergamum. This was the administrative center for the province and leader of the imperial cult in Asia. And there would have been considerable pressure for the Christians not to appear disloyal to the emperor. They too faced internal threats with false teachings or rival teachings. They're apparently sympathetic to a group called the Nicolaitans. We don't know a whole lot about them, but that John calls them false teachers. And the Old Testament story that he alludes to, the story of Balaam, implies that just as Balaam was attempting to lead ancient Israel astray, so this group were attempting to lead God's people into idolatry and away from the one true God. Fourthly, Thyatira. Now, this city was a trading center and noted for its number of trade guilds, including metalworkers and dyers of wool. And it's interesting, I find the address that Jesus is depicted at the beginning as the one with eyes like flames of fire and feet like brilliant metal. Images that would have been very familiar and would have resonated with this city of metal workers. Now, these Christians are praised for their love, but they're also criticized for tolerating the false teachings of the so-called prophetess Jezebel. She, like the Nicolaitans, apparently seemed to prefer cultural assimilation, that is going along with some of the pagan practices in order to get along with their neighbors. The trade guilds in those days were closely aligned with worship of pagan gods. There are certain privileges and there are places to be and ways in which to be recognized and succeed in society by having these associations. The trouble is that one of the practices of worshiping the pagan gods was to sacrifice meat, and then later that meat would get sold. So Christians were facing this tough choice of whether or not they could buy meat that had been sacrificed to pagan deities, and whether that was compliance with the idolatrous practices of their neighbors. And John urges them not to give in to this temptation, but to stand firm in the faith they were first taught. Next, we learn a little bit about the Christians of Sardis. The city was known for its impregnable citadel, this mighty citadel in the city that had never been conquered by force. But these Christians are deemed spiritually dead or asleep. And they are warned and almost reminded of the fact that the citadel, twice in its history, was overcome, and that was through a stealth attack. And that Jesus would come in the same way to them if they were asleep, if they were not aware. One translation puts it this way: wake up and put some backbone into what still survives. Though they may appear dead or asleep, the message is one that the God of resurrection is able to reinvigorate and energize his people. Sixthly, we're almost there, Philadelphia. Philadelphia, not East Coast U.S. Philadelphia here, but it was another prosperous town. It had suffered devastations of an earthquake a few decades before. Like Smyrna, the Christians found themselves at odds with their Jewish neighbors, who were believed to have kicked them out of the synagogue. And they are promised in this passage that Jesus, and not the synagogue, has the key of David. And that there may be hope yet, both for Jew and for Gentile alike, to approach God through Christ. In fact, Philadelphia, that was once thought to be a center of the Hellenization of the empire, the spread of Greek language and culture, it actually ended up becoming a hub of Paul's missionary activity that spread the gospel throughout the known world at that time. And lastly, and perhaps least, we come to Laodicea, which was the focus of our reading today. We'll spend just a couple more longer minutes with it. It was a major commercial city. Three very significant industries in Laodicea were its banking, manufacturing of clothing, and it was also a center of medical education. So it was a wealthy city. They had much. They also had a very interesting geographical feature, which has undertones in the message we heard today. There was water from the hot springs in the plateau of the Hierapolis. And hot water, of course, in those days, as even today, had certain medicinal qualities, properties. It would be very helpful. Hot springs. But this water flowed over a cliff in full view of the city. And as it fell, and as it continued towards the city, by the time it reached the city, it was no longer hot and in possession of those healing properties. But nor was it cold enough to refresh and invigorate, like the springs in Colossae would have. But rather the water had become lukewarm, sulfurous, and nauseating. So too, apparently, had the Christians. Their spiritual condition is being described as poor, blind, and naked. Remember again, their famous industries: banking, medicine, and clothing. Poor, blind, and naked. It's a fascinating message. All of these 7 churches are speaking to specific contexts in ways that would resonate with their hearers. And I think it's very important that we not lose sight of the fact that these writings were addressed to real people. People who were coping, one person puts it, not always effectively, with difficult and painful situations. If the humble and faithful Philadelphians and Christians of Smyrna earned unstinted praise, the self-sufficient Laodiceans, doubtless to their chagrin and incredulous surprise, hear only words of blame, and the church at Sardis is more dead than alive. The Ephesians may sustain orthodoxy, but the price of tolerance. And on the other hand, the situation in Thyatira and Pergamum warns that tolerance may be pushed too far. There are some strong words in these passages, especially for church in Laodicea. But what I take great comfort and hope in is that it's clear that Christ is walking among the churches. That he has a message for them and for us that is incisive and decisive. He looks at the state of each. He finds love, faithfulness even to death, patient endurance in the face of intolerance and persecution. He does expose their shortcomings, But we know that love always entails hard truth-telling. I believe that today our church is in need of a fresh experience and understanding of God's transformative love. For the world around us is as it was for those 7 churches. Chaotic, dangerous. We face dangers like extremism, global warming, war. But we also struggle with those forces within our own communities that would harm us, like prejudice, fear, intolerance, our own mortalities, failing health of those around us. We struggle, we wrestle with these things that might cause us to lose hope or abandon our faith. Sometimes we've created messes for ourselves, sometimes we've adhered to our cultural values like the Laodiceans who said, we have everything that we need. Look at all that we have. Why do we need God? This is one of the dominant ideologies of our time. The word for us today is that Jesus walks among his people. He sees our troubles, exposes our darkness, and offers us hope and promise. And I love that as sharp as that word to Laodiceans was, as hard as it might have been for them to hear, they could probably almost taste it when Jesus says that I would spit you out of my mouth because you are lukewarm. It would probably remind them of times when they've tried to take a drink of water from that spring. To feel how repulsed they were by it. But Jesus is trying to jolt them out of their apathy and help them to understand, from his perspective, the need for them to come to him. And at the end of this stern message, we find one of the most beautiful and warmest invitations and words in all of Scripture. Words we've probably all heard many times. They are words of invitation. To come back to God, to have one's heart opened to God, open to Christ. To receive him anew. To be reinvigorated and refreshed in his presence. Here I stand knocking at the door. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and dine with such a one, and one with me. Is the door to our heart open to Christ this day? Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, in this life we hear many voices. Voices that would lead us away from you. That would tell us that we are sufficient on our own. That would tempt us to pour our energy and devotion into people, places, and things that would take us away from you. Lord, help us to see that our lives are to be living expressions of your presence with us. At home, at school, at work, with friends, with family. Lord, may the good things you have blessed us with not be things that take us away from you, but be reminders of your graciousness and goodness towards us. Lord, may we receive, Lord, your gold, yourself, which would heal us, your white robes that would clothe us. Lord, grant us the grace of open hearts and open ears to hear your knocking. Let us open the door, let you in, and fellowship with you anew this day. We pray in Christ's name.